بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى Muhammad. The next chapter deals with the ritual prayer. The Arabic word for the ritual prayer has two different meanings. The linguistic meaning of the word means supplication. The technical meaning of the word means an act of worship that consists of remembrances and pillars, a declaration of Allah's greatness. The takbir makes certain actions during it prohibited, and the final salutations, the taslim, makes those actions permissible again. The author begins by saying, "It is one of the pillars of Islam, as is known by the well-known prophetic tradition. It is religiously obligatory," the author says, "upon the morally responsible person. This exempts the insane person or one who is mentally deficient. Even the child," the author says, "must be ordered to do it and taught it at the age of 7. They must also be struck for neglecting it at the age of 10, in the case of a boy, and at the age of 9 in the case of a girl. The striking refers to the strike of correcting behavior, not beating or abusing. The author says otherwise, the sin falls on the father or guardian, as is known by the well-known narrated tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he commanded the above. As for the wife, it is not obligatory for the husband to order her to pray unless it is a strong encouragement, like one would do with other Muslims. It is not obligatory for him to leave her if she doesn't do it. The author then begins with the preconditions of the prayer's validity. He states, the conditions of its validity are 6. The first condition is that the body must be pure from the states of major and minor ritual impurity as well as from impure substances. We have previously discussed the major and minor ritual impurities as well as the manner to remove them. Please refer back to those lessons. The purification from the impure states and substances should be in a way that does not cause harm to the person. If one cannot remove the aforementioned impure states or substances without harm, it is not a precondition of the prayer's validity. The prayer in this case would be considered sound. The second condition is that the private parts must be covered during the whole prayer, insomuch that if someone wanted to see the private parts of the one praying, he wouldn't be able to. If one attempted to cover the private parts and another was able to see them, there is no harm on either, and the prayer would be sound. The material for the clothing must not be transparent as to show the color of the person. If so, the prayer in such garment would not be sound. The author says, that is, the clothing used to cover oneself during the prayer, boundaries for the man are from under the navel to below the knees. If any of that is exposed, even the hair, the prayer is invalidated. Regarding the woman, her nakedness is her whole body in the prayer, except her face and hands. This would also include the hair in those areas. That is to say that if the hair in those places were exposed, her prayer would be invalidated. If strands of hair from her temples are exposed, then there is no harm. The author says it is recommended, that is for the man, to cover the back, including the chest, shoulders, and the upper shins during the prayer. The third precondition for the prayer's validity is that anything carried or worn by the one praying must be pure. Also, only that which is permitted is allowed. For example, if a man wears a ring, it must not be gold because it is religiously prohibited for men. If a man prays in a gold ring, his prayer would be considered invalid. Similar is the case with usurped clothing. The wearing of such is religiously prohibited both inside and outside of the prayer. The wearing of usurped clothing in the prayer invalidates the prayer. The author says it is forbidden to wear silk. This is the most established opinion in the school, although there is disagreement as to the amount of silk worn. The only exception is if one wears silk out of necessity, such as an illness. Then one's prayer would be considered sound. If one is forced out of necessity to pray naked, he must pray sitting cross-legged. He is to gesture the bowings and prostrations without standing. If one has the choice of praying in usurped clothing or naked, one is to choose to pray naked in the manner we just mentioned. The only excuse to pray in usurped clothing is if it is out of necessity, such as one who fears for his health. The author continues by saying that in addition to prohibition is that which is saturated in yellow and red absolutely, all of which invalidates the prayer. Although this text mentions the wearing of clothing saturated in red and yellow as forbidden, the text Al-Azhar mentions the wearing of clothing saturated in yellow and red as discouraged to wear. That is to say that it is not mentioned among those things which are religiously prohibited to wear that invalidate the prayer. Praying in clothing completely saturated in red and yellow is considered discouraged because it is an open display of excessive ornamentation for men. This is not the case, however, with clothing completely saturated in black, green, or blue. This also precludes the wearing of red and yellow for women. Women are allowed to do such without any discouragement. The author then mentions other types of clothing discouraged for one to wear by saying, "It is disliked but not prohibited to wear clothes with a lot of dirt, like that of a farmer. This is because it is encouraged for the one praying to wear the best of his clothing." The author says, "It is also discouraged but not prohibited to wear pants alone or a fur coat without a shirt or a sarong under it. This is because one would not be safe from uncovering one's nakedness in only pants or a fur. This discouragement is lifted if the pants are worn along with the fur." The fourth precondition for the prayer soundness is that the place of prayer must be permissible to use. It is not permitted, the author says, to pray in 4 places, the first of which is upon a tomb. This refers to the grave of a Muslim, a non-Muslim protected by contract, and the graves of those who are at war with the Muslims. The second place mentioned as impermissible to pray in is a road frequented by people. Any road which is dilapidated and not frequented by people is permissible for prayer. The third place forbidden for prayer is a usurped dwelling. It is impermissible to pray in any house, mosque, or building which was unlawfully seized. The exception to the aforementioned prohibitions is if one feared that the prayer time would elapse before one could find a permissible place. Then it would be permissible. The fourth of the impermissible places is usurped land. This prohibition is specifically for the one who usurped the land. It is impermissible absolutely for the usurper to pray on the land he unlawfully seized. As for the one who hadn't usurped it, his prayer would be sound if he hadn't or he didn't know that it was usurped, or if he had the permission of the original owner. The same is the case with usurped clothing and dwellings. The permission of the person from whom it was unlawfully usurped removes the prohibition. In Al-Azhar, it continues by mentioning 5 places in which it is discouraged to pray. The first one is a place where there is an image of an animate being, such as a human or animal. What is excluded from this is the image of an inanimate object. There is no problem or discouragement with such. As for those things, or the image of an animate being, the discouragement is if the image portrayed is that of a complete being. This would exclude if a portion of the animate being was portrayed. The portion of the image that must be removed is an external part, which would prevent life if the image were alive. For example, there would be no discouragement if an image of an animal is missing a head. This is because the animal would not be able to live without its head had it been alive. Also, if the image is under the feet of the one praying or on the roof, there is no discouragement. The second place discouraged to pray is among graves. The third place which is discouraged is near ritual impurities, such as next to a wall with urine or near a person with semen on his clothes. Such person who is praying is to not move anything which has ritual impurities while praying. This would be considered as carrying something impure and would thus invalidate the prayer. The fourth place discouraged to pray is bathrooms because of the possibility of ritual impurities, even if it may be clean. The fifth discouraged place is to pray on felt or coarse wool and the like. When Imam al-Qasim al-Rasi alayhi salam was asked about the discouragement from praying on wool, he said that it was due to humility. Instead, he said, one is to prostrate on the earth out of lowliness and dejection. The fifth precondition for the prayer soundness is that which the one praying comes into contact with or touches must be pure, that is, free of ritual impurities, except the author says in the case of what squeezes by. That is, if something with a ritual impurity brushes against the one praying, the prayer would not be invalidated. Also, the author says, anything that she or he totally moves must be pure. We alluded to this earlier. If the one praying moves an object with an external ritual impurity such as urine, semen, or blood, the prayer would be considered invalidated. However, if one moves someone who is in the state of major ritual impurity, such as a menstruating woman, the prayer would not be invalidated. If one is unable to pray in a place devoid of ritual impurity, one is to simply gesture the prayer postures in one's place without touching the place of ritual impurity. It has been said that the one praying can lay a prayer rug over the ritual impurity and pray on it. However, the most established opinion is that this would similarly be invalid due to the contact of one's immediate prayer space with the ritual impurity. The sixth precondition for the prayer's soundness is that one must face the Qibla completely or partially if it is possible, the author says, without uncertainty. It is an obligation upon the individual who can see the Kaaba to identify its direction. It is also an obligation upon the one who relies on the judgment of that individual as well as the one who cannot see the Kaaba due to blindness or distance. The author says, one must at least face the general direction if one is not able to, that is, determine the exact location otherwise. If one must investigate regarding its direction, the author says, in order to attain certainty. Then, the author says, one relies upon a living, just person, if one is unable to investigate oneself. One is to rely upon the testimony of a just living person if one can find him and such person is able to investigate. This person's justice is determined by the lack or the open display of major sin. If the person openly commits major sin, such person's justice falls and his or her testimony is not to be accepted. Then the author says, if one is unable to investigate or find a living just person, the author says the prayer niche is the valid direction. One relies upon the prayer niche established in a mosque. Then, if the three aforementioned methods are not possible, one can pray, the author says, any direction that one wants at the end of the prayer time. For example, if a person is riding on a ship or any other vessel, and he or she is unable to determine the direction of the Qibla, or if a person is ill and unable to find the direction, it would be obligatory for that person to pray in any direction. The one who is excused and exempted from facing the Qibla has to meet the following three conditions. 1. The one riding on a vessel only prays a supererogatory prayer. 2. The one must be seated and unable to walk to change directions. And 3. Such person must be on something that prevents turning to the direction of the Qibla. According to Al-Azhar, it is discouraged to pray facing a sleeping person, a dead person, a tomb, the sun, a torch, or a ritual impurity. It is encouraged for the one praying in an open field to place something in front of him or her that is the size of a forearm. The best place to pray the 5 obligatory prayers is a mosque. The conditions of a mosque will be discussed in the section of endowments, inshallah. The best mosque is the Haram in Mecca. Then, after that, is the Prophet's mosques in Medina, the Holy Mosque in Jerusalem, the Mosque of Kufa, any congregational mosque, and finally, any noble place known for religion and sacred knowledge. The author says, it is religiously obligatory to respect the mosques of Allah. Nothing is permitted in them except acts of worship, such as engaging in the remembrance of Allah, supplications, and prayer. Included under engaging in the remembrance of Allah is the study of sacred knowledge. The author says it is prohibited to spit inside of them, that is, inside of mosques, use them for trivial purposes, or what's above it. This is due to the respect afforded to mosques.